Are joined by Senator Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware. Senator, thank you for spending a few more minutes of your already long day in tonight with us. I have to ask you, do you have a perhaps silent focus group of Republicans who you look over to during arguments like tonight? Talk to us about attentiveness. Talk about whether or not you see so much as one mind being changed during something like that, a summation by Adam Schiff.
I do, Brian, have a number of Republican colleagues who I'm watching closely. It was during closing arguments in the Kavanaugh confirmation process that I was looking closely at my friend, then Senator Jeff Flake, and realized just how deeply troubled he was by the testimony of the woman who was accusing now Justice Kavanaugh of misdeeds, Dr. Blasi Fords. These are very long days. The arc of the presentation by the House managers is quite long. The amount of evidence, both witness testimony and the documents, texts, is fairly heavy. So in the course of the day, you can see folks' attention wander and their engagement come in and out. But the closing by Adam Schiff this evening was masterful, was compelling, should have left every senator in the chamber with a lump in their throat thinking about the consequences for the future of our country. The sweep and scope of the scheme that's been laid out, the corrupt scheme carried out by President Trump through his direction to shake down Ukraine, a vulnerable ally, and to withhold both a meeting in the White House that they badly wanted and needed, and $391 million in military aid as they continue to face attacks from Russian-backed separatists. The consequences of that scheme and the scope of it, how many people were involved, how many senior members of this administration were aware of it, really struck even me. Look, frankly, senators, during the time that the House Intelligence Committee and the House Judiciary Committee were doing their hearings, senators had hearings, they had other meetings, they had committee markups. So I doubt that any of us really paid undivided attention to the House's handiwork. We got to see it yesterday and today, very well laid out with great detail. And they were able to weave a story that is very compelling. So I think the president's advocates have their work cut out for them. If President Trump really hopes to be exonerated, they're going to have to allow some additional witnesses and some additional testimony and documents, because simply arguing that the Constitution doesn't allow us to impeach someone for the sort of abuse of power that's been argued here, I don't think holds water, and I don't think will persuade the average American.
I'm glad you used those two words, deeply troubled. We saw what deeply troubled looked like during the Kavanaugh hearing, where your friend from Arizona got from deeply troubled to a yes vote. Your colleague from Maine, Susan Collins, on the other side, is deeply troubled all the time.
That's
what
right.
evidence do we have that we've moved anyone off the dime 53-47?
There's no concrete evidence yet, Brian, and one of the concerns I've got is that members of the Republican majority who can no longer say, oh, there's nothing here, the House did a shoddy job, there's no evidence that we should worry about. A number of them were saying yesterday, oh, this is boring, it's repetitious, we've heard all of this before. After today's arguments, they were mostly saying, well, if we had additional witnesses, it might get tied up for months in the courts. It is entirely possible that folks, for example, who are no longer serving in the administration would not be able to assert executive privilege as broadly as is being suggested to Republicans. It's entirely possible that folks who never worked in the executive branch but are central to this inquiry and would have important things to say could be called, and executive privilege wouldn't cover them. So there are a number of conversations going on between Democrats and Republicans about how important is it to you to get to the truth. And as Adam Schiff said in his closing tonight, aren't you concerned not just about the damage that President Trump can continue to do in the remainder of this year before the election, but about what it says to history, to future presidents, and to the world if, as a body, the Senate, the Republican majority of the Senate, collectively shrugs and says, he may have done something wrong, but it's not that big a deal.
Let me close on this one. If the vote for witnesses was secret ballot, what would the tally be?
I think it'd be 70-30. I don't know that for sure, of course, but I think there'd be a very strong vote to allow additional witnesses, especially if we reached some agreement that allowed us to know that they would come, and they'd come before the Senate, and they'd come quickly. I think there are a number of senators who would really like to know what actually happened in this case, because the details we've heard argued are so alarming.
Chris Coons, Democrat of Delaware, thank you very much for spending a few minutes with us here tonight.